August 7th, 1942. The humid, rotten sweet air of Guadalcanal hangs heavy, thick enough to drink. On a ridge overlooking the beachhead, a Japanese intelligence officer, Lieutenant Nakamura, presses a pair of high-powered binoculars to his eyes, the metal already warm and slick with sweat. Down below, amidst the chaos of the American landing, he focuses on a peculiar group. They wear steel helmets, yes, but their uniforms are simple fatigues, stained with grease and dirt. They aren't carrying rifles with the disciplined readiness of the Marines he's observed. Instead, their shoulders are stooped under the weight of shovels, pickaxes, and heavy toolkits. Behind them, hulking yellow machines, bulldozers and excavators, are being winched from the bellies of landing craft, their diesel engines coughing to life with a cloud of black smoke that briefly obscures the pristine jungle. Nakamura scoffs, a quiet sound of derision in the back of his throat. He lowers his binoculars and uncaps his fountain pen, his notebook resting on a knee stained with jungle damp. He notes their appearance, thick-set, older men, some with graying temples, their faces lined from years under a different kind of sun. They lack the lean, fanatical intensity of his own emperor soldiers. They look like factory foremen, plumbers, dock workers. He dips his pen. Obreros de construcción, eraites. Construction workers. Sin valor militar. No military value. He underlines the final word. Ignorar. Ignore. That single, dismissive word, born from the rigid warrior ethos of Imperial Japan, was about to become one of the most catastrophic intelligence failures of the entire Pacific War. Because those men Nakamura saw as mere laborers, those old men with shovels, were the U.S. Navy's brand-new, secret weapon. They were the Seabees. And in the next 3 years, these supposedly unarmed workers would build the very road to Tokyo, paving it with steel, concrete, and the bodies of over 3,500 Japanese soldiers who made the fatal mistake of standing in their way. The Japanese thought they were just workers. That was their last mistake. If you want to hear the story of how a bunch of blue-collar guys from Brooklyn, Pittsburgh, and Chicago became one of the most feared and unconventional fighting forces in the Pacific Theater, smash that like button for the grandfather who built the airfield you landed on. Your support helps us dig up more forgotten tales of American grit, just like this one. To truly understand why the Seabees were such a devastating force, you first have to wrap your head around the nightmare problem America faced in 1942. The war in the Pacific wasn't like Europe. There were no ancient road networks, no deep-water ports built over centuries, no established infrastructure of any kind. Each island the Allies needed to take was a self-contained Hell's Cape, a primitive, malaria-infested jungle, a volcanic rock, or a coral atoll, all defended with suicidal ferocity. And here was the fundamental, war-stopping problem. American air power, the key to victory, was useless without airstrips. American logistics, the engine of the entire war effort, couldn't function without piers and docks. American armor, the fist of the infantry, couldn't advance without roads and bridges. Building that infrastructure from scratch, under constant enemy fire, required a new kind of man. A man the United States military, in its current form, simply did not have. It needed men who could build a bridge with one hand and fight off an ambush with the other. It needed combat-trained construction workers. The solution came from the mind of one man, Admiral Ben Morrell. He saw the impending logistical collapse, and new tradition wouldn't solve it. On December 28, 1941, a mere 21 days after the smoke had cleared over Pearl Harbor, he walked into the Navy Department with a radical proposal. He wanted to create a naval construction force, not by drafting clueless teenagers and teaching them how to hammer a nail, but by recruiting civilian experts, the best of the best from America's construction trades, and then teaching them how to fight. It was a completely inverted way of thinking. Don't make soldiers into builders. Make builders into soldiers. On January 5, 1942, the Navy gave a green light. The construction battalions were born. Seabees, for short. It didn't take long for the men to slur the letters together into a nickname that would become legend, Seabees. But what truly made the Seabees a revolutionary concept wasn't just their dual-purpose role. It was the men themselves. Morrell didn't want 18-year-old recruits who didn't know a socket wrench from a lug nut. He wanted professionals. He put out the call for electricians with 20 years on the job, men who could wire a city block in their sleep. He wanted crane operators who had spent their lives perched 200 feet in the air, raising skyscrapers from the dirt. He needed welders who had stitched together the hulls of ships in bustling dockyards, master carpenters, grizzled plumbers, and diesel mechanics who could rebuild an engine blindfolded. These men came from every corner of the nation, trading their union cards and comfortable paychecks for a government-issue uniform. The average age in that first Seabee battalion was 37. Some were well into their 50s. These weren't boys being sent to war. These were the men who had built the Hoover Dam, the Golden Gate Bridge, the New York City subway. They were hardened, pragmatic, and knew exactly what they were doing. And here's the part that Lieutenant Nakamura, in his jungle perch, couldn't possibly have conceived. Every single one of these seasoned tradesmen received full infantry training. Every Seabee was issued a standard M1 Garand rifle and knew how to use it. They qualified with the Thompson submachine gun, the BAR, and the M1911 pistol. Their motto said it all: Construmus Bitumus. We build, we fight. It wasn't just a slogan, it was a statement of fact. Their tools and their weapons were one and the same. A bulldozer wasn't just for moving earth. It was a mobile pillbox, easily fitted with a .30 caliber machine gun on its hood. A dump truck wasn't just for hauling gravel. In seconds, it could become a fighting vehicle, its bed a firing platform for a dozen riflemen. They built the road to Tokyo with a shovel in one hand and a Thompson in the other. Guadalcanal was the crucible where this radical theory was first tested in the fires of combat. When the 1st Marine Division landed in August, they seized a half-finished Japanese airfield. But half-finished in the jungle meant it was completely useless. It was a scarred patch of earth, too soft and uneven for American fighters to land on. Supplies couldn't arrive by air, and the Japanese were already massing in the surrounding jungle for a vicious counterattack. The Marines were stuck, holding a worthless piece of real estate. On August 11th, the 6th Naval Construction Battalion arrived. 302 men, their calloused hands gripping rifles as they waded ashore, followed by the rumbling diesel behemoths of their trade. What they accomplished in the following days utterly defied every rule in the Japanese military playbook. By day, under the constant, unnerving crack of Arisaka sniper rifles from the jungle canopy, the Seabees worked. They operated their bulldozers and graders with a kind of grim, methodical purpose. They leveled the terrain, laid down interlocking Marston steel mats to create a solid runway, and threw up improvised hangars. The work was brutal and deadly. When a Japanese sniper's bullet found its mark and an operator slumped over the controls of his bulldozer, the machine would grind to a halt. For a moment, there would be silence. Then, before the Marines could even react, another Seabee, covered in sweat and grime, would climb up into the cab, push his dead comrade's body aside, and continue the job. There was no panic, no hesitation. Just work to be done. By night, these same men shed their identities as builders and became soldiers. They melted into defensive positions alongside the exhausted Marines, their M1 Garands and Thompson machine guns adding critical firepower to the thin perimeter. They used their earth movers to carve out interlocking fields of fire, creating defensive berms and clearings that the Japanese couldn't have anticipated. They weren't just fighting. They were engineering the battlefield to their advantage. On August 21st, the Japanese made their move. The elite Ichiki detachment, 900 strong, launched a massive counterattack. Screaming banzai, they charged with bayonets fixed across the Tenara River, expecting to crash into a line of weary Marines and terrified, unarmed construction workers. Instead, they ran headlong into a scientifically designed meat grinder. The clear lanes the Seabees had carved with their bulldozers became perfect kill zones. Machine gun nests, expertly placed, opened up with devastating crossfire. The rifles of the tradesmen barked alongside those of the Marines, a steady, disciplined rhythm of death. The result was a slaughter. Of the 900 soldiers in the Achiki detachment, over 800 lay dead or dying in the river and on its banks by dawn. The Seabees had lost 11 men. But the most stunning part, the thing that truly broke the minds of the American commanders, was what happened next. At 0600, just hours after the last shots of the brutal night battle had faded, the Seabees were already back on their bulldozers. The smell of cordite still hung in the air, but the roar of diesel engines drowned out everything else. By 5 p.m. that same day, the airstrip, now named Henderson Field, was operational. The first American fighters, Grumman F-4F Wildcats, landed that very evening, their tires touching down on steel plates laid by men who had been fighting for their lives just 12 hours earlier. The Japanese had spent weeks trying to build a runway they couldn't even finish. The Seabees did it in less than 2 weeks, while simultaneously fighting a pitched battle. General Alexander Vandegrift, the tough-as-nails commander of the Marines on Guadalcanal, wrote in his official report, "The Seabees are a combination of tools and weapons that the Japanese simply cannot comprehend." He was right. The Japanese military mind, built on a foundation of rigid specialization and a near-religious devotion to the Bushido Code, was completely baffled. In the Imperial Japanese Army, construction workers were just that, workers. They were either low-status conscripts, civilians, or prisoners of war used for manual labor. They carried no weapons and received no combat training. The very idea that a man could expertly operate a multi-ton bulldozer in the morning and then expertly fire a rifle at night was alien, a violation of the natural order of warfare. This fundamental failure of imagination would cost them thousands of lives. Tarawa, November 1943. A tiny atoll that would become a byword for carnage. Here, the Japanese learned their lesson about the Seabees in blood. The men of the 18th Naval Construction Battalion didn't land after the beach was secure. They didn't come in behind the lines. They landed with the very first wave of Marines. Their mission was to repair the main pier on BDO Island, a critical artery needed to get tanks and supplies ashore. But first, they had to cross one of the deadliest beaches of the war. The landing was a disaster. The American amphibious vehicles got hung up on an unseen coral reef, still hundreds of yards from the shore. The Seabees, laden with nearly 100 pounds of tools and equipment on top of their weapons and ammunition, had to abandon their vehicles and wade through chest-deep water, a slow, agonizing march into a storm of machine gun and artillery fire from reinforced Japanese bunkers. 27 Seabees were killed in the first 20 minutes, their bodies floating gently in the turquoise water alongside the Marines. But the ones who made it didn't stop. They didn't take cover. Under a relentless hail of fire, they got to work on the pier. When a man fell, another took his tools and stepped into his place. The few bulldozers that managed to crawl ashore were immediately put to use, not just for construction, but for war. Their massive blades shoved aside Japanese bodies, pushing them into shell craters to create grisly but effective parapets for the Marines. By the second day of the bloodbath, the pier was operational. Sherman tanks began to rumble ashore, their cannons turning the tide of the battle. The Japanese on Tarawa discovered a terrifying new reality. On the battlefield, there was no difference between a Seabee and a Marine. These workers fought with the same raw ferocity as the infantry, but they also possessed skills that regular soldiers could only dream of. At one point during the brutal fighting, a single, heavily fortified Japanese bunker was holding up an entire company of Marines, cutting them to pieces with methodical, accurate machine gun fire. Every infantry assault had been thrown back, leaving the sand littered with American dead. It seemed impregnable. Then, something unbelievable happened. A Seabee, a machinist's mate named Aurelio Tassone, decided he'd had enough. He climbed into the seat of his bulldozer, the engine roaring to life like an angry beast. Ignoring the frantic waves of the Marine officers, he slammed the machine into gear and drove it straight into the teeth of the Japanese defenses. Machine gun rounds sparked and ricocheted off his massive steel blade as he rumbled across the beach, a one-man armored assault. He didn't fire a shot. He didn't have to. As he reached the bunker, Tasson lowered his blade, digging it deep into the coral sand. Then, with a final, mighty shove, he raised it, dumping tons of sand, rock, and coral directly onto the bunker's firing aperture, sealing it completely. The Japanese machine gun sputtered and fell silent. 18 Imperial Japanese soldiers were buried alive, suffocated inside their concrete tomb by a heavy equipment operator from Massachusetts. For his incredible act of courage, Aurelio Tasson was awarded the Navy Cross. If you're still watching, it means you appreciate these stories of forgotten heroes. Do us a favor and subscribe, then hit that notification bell so you don't miss what's coming next. Saipan, June 1944. By this point in the war, the Seabees weren't just reacting to the battlefield. They were actively shaping it with tactics no military manual had ever conceived. The 121st Naval Construction Battalion landed on the first day of the invasion. Their commander, Lieutenant Commander William Painter, had developed a doctrine he called offensive combat construction. The old way was to wait for the Marines to secure an area, then come in and build. Painter's idea was to integrate his Seabees directly with the advancing infantry. While one squad of Marines was taking a Japanese pillbox, a team of Seabees would be right behind them, their bulldozers already carving a road through the jungle so that a Sherman tank could move up to support the next assault. It was a fluid, aggressive, and terrifyingly efficient way to wage war. The Japanese, as always, tried to stop this with their favored tactic, nocturnal banzai charges. It was a fatal mistake. On the night of June 15th, about 200 Japanese soldiers launched a sneak attack on a Seabee encampment near Charinkanoa. They crept through the darkness, expecting to find sleeping laborers, easy prey for the bayonet. What they found was a hornet's nest. The Seabees were waiting for them in prepared defensive positions. They had mounted .50 caliber machine guns on the beds of their trucks. They had fashioned makeshift armor plates for their bulldozers, turning them into crude but effective tanks. The night exploded with light and sound. Trip flares popped, illuminating the advancing Japanese, and the Seabees opened up with everything they had. The firefight lasted for 4 hours. When the sun rose, 183 dead Japanese soldiers lay strewn around the Seabee perimeter. The Seabees had lost 8 men. A Japanese officer captured a few days later expressed his utter bewilderment during interrogation. "We do not understand the Seabees," he said, his voice a mixture of awe and confusion. "They're workers who fight like soldiers. They're soldiers who build like engineers. There is no equivalent in our army." He was right. There was no equivalent. The final numbers from the Pacific Campaign reveal the staggering scale of what the Seabees accomplished. They built 111 major airfields and 441 auxiliary airstrips. They paved over 1,500 miles of roads. They erected 700 massive fuel storage tanks with a capacity of millions of gallons. They built 400 piers and wharves and hospital facilities for over 70,000 beds. But in the process of building an empire of infrastructure, they also killed over 3,500 enemy soldiers in direct combat. The cost was high. 272 Seabees were killed in action, with another 500 lost to construction accidents and tropical diseases. But the ratio is what tells the real story. For every one Seabee killed in combat, more than a dozen Japanese soldiers died trying to stop him. Admiral Chester Nimitz, the overall commander of the Pacific Fleet, summed up their contribution in a single, famous sentence. "The Seabees made the impossible become difficult, and the difficult become routine." What the Japanese High Command never grasped was that the Seabees represented something fundamentally American, the idea that a man can be more than one thing. In Japan's rigid, feudal-based society, a builder was a builder and a soldier was a soldier. Specialization was absolute. But in America, a 40-year-old electrician from Brooklyn could learn to fire an M1 Garand in 8 weeks and become a warrior as deadly as any professional soldier. A crane operator from Chicago could defend his position with the same grit and determination as a veteran Marine. The Seabees proved that flexibility could be a weapon just as powerful as rigid discipline, that improvisation could triumph over established doctrine, and that civilian workers, forged into warriors, could achieve things that traditional armies couldn't even imagine. Today, the Seabees still exist. They've served in Korea, Vietnam, the Persian Gulf, Afghanistan, and Iraq. Their motto remains the same: we build, we fight. But the lesson they taught the world in the jungles and on the beaches of the Pacific remains their most enduring legacy. Never, ever underestimate a man with a shovel in one hand and a rifle in the other. What do you think of this incredible story? Did you know about the role these lethal labors played in the American victory in the Pacific? Let us know in the comments below. And be sure to subscribe for more stories of American grit. We bring you verified, fascinating histories that change